Have you ever held the kill switch to an empire? The line between a dedicated employee and the one who destroys the system is exactly one unanswered email. Welcome to the invisible corporate world, where suits think they run things until they pull the pin on a federal grenade. Pour yourself something strong. I'm going to tell you how a $5 coffee burned a $3 billion corporation to the ground. Don't blink. Hello to the wonderful audience of Boss Revenge Stories. YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel, leaving us without a budget to keep operating. But we want to keep bringing you these thrilling corporate tales. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating for you. You can easily donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the video description or pinned comment. My name is Mia Rogers. I am 34 years old, and for the last 8 years, I was the System Integrity Advisor at Vanguard Aerospace Logistics. Vanguard was a private behemoth. We transported the stuff that makes the modern world tick, but scares the living daylights out of normal people. I am talking about hazardous materials, volatile reactive chemicals, and highly sensitive aviation components. It was the kind of cargo that, if handled incorrectly, could turn a runway into a crater. My job was to make sure that never happened. I am a practical woman. I favor dark, tailored suits that blend into the background, and I have a mind wired for absolute compliance. I was the silent, invisible engine that kept the company out of federal prison. More specifically, I kept us off the radar of FACA, the Federal Aviation Commerce Authority. FACA is a hypothetical nightmare of a regulatory body, a merciless government agency that breathes down the neck of every logistics firm in the country. They do not do warnings. They do immediate, catastrophic groundings. For 8 years, I was the sole custodian of Token Beta 7. It was not just a flash drive. It was a biometric, titanium-encased hard drive that held the federal-level encryption keys required to approve every single high-risk shipment that passed through Vanguard. If a crate of industrial explosives needed to cross state lines, it needed the digital signature from Token Beta 7. If a batch of reactive lithium compounds was loaded onto a cargo plane, my token had to authorize the manifest. Without my thumbprint and the token plugged into the secure mainframe, not a single cargo plane was legally allowed to lift its wheels off the tarmac. My workspace was a windowless room on the 4th floor, heavily secured, isolated from the noise of the marketing department. It was just me, the servers, and the heavy titanium weight of Token Beta 7 in my pocket. The token felt cold, a constant physical reminder of the federal liability resting squarely on my shoulders. I liked the coldness. It kept me sharp. I did my job perfectly. In fact, I did it so perfectly that the executives in the glass corner offices completely forgot I existed. When you are a master at putting out fires before the smoke detectors even register them, people just assume the building is naturally fireproof. Upper management honestly believed that passing federal audits year after year was simply a byproduct of their brilliant corporate culture or just plain good luck. They never saw the 60-hour work weeks I put in, meticulously checking safety data sheets and federal compliance updates. They just saw the profits rolling in. The only person who truly understood the gravity of my role and the immense power of Token Beta 7 was the old chief executive officer. He built Vanguard from the ground up, and he knew that without my clearance, his $3 billion empire was nothing more than a collection of parked airplanes. But life has a funny way of upending stability. A massive stroke hit him one Tuesday evening, forcing him into immediate retirement. The Golden Throne was abruptly handed over to his son-in-law. This new chief executive officer was a man whose entire resume consisted of failing upward and marrying into money. He was a walking disaster dressed in bespoke Italian wool. He had never managed anything more complex than a country club dinner menu, yet he was now in charge of a global logistics network. But the real disaster was not the new boss. It was his younger sister, Chloe Sterling. Chloe was a former social media influencer. Her pinnacle of professional achievement was knowing exactly which Instagram filter made her iced coffee look the most aesthetically pleasing. Her brother, in his infinite nepotistic wisdom, decided to bring her into the corporate fold. He created a brand new executive role just for her, appointing Chloe as the Vice President of Innovation and Strategic Vision. From day one, the temperature in the building shifted. Chloe strutted into the logistics headquarters, treating it like her personal lifestyle brand project. She had absolutely zero understanding of aerospace regulations, chemical volatility, or the unforgiving nature of federal law. All she cared about was aesthetics and efficiency. It did not take long for her gaze to land on my department. My airtight, federally mandated security protocols were suddenly under scrutiny. During her very first week, she walked into my secure floor wearing a pastel designer outfit that cost more than my monthly salary, trailed by a cloud of overly sweet perfume. She did not ask what I did. She told me what I was going to do. "Mia, these federal clearance steps are just so archaic," Chloe said, tapping her tablet with a stylus. "I was looking over the workflow, and the whole process just lacks aesthetic appeal. It is completely killing our momentum. We are pivoting to a high-speed delivery model, and your little checkpoints are creating way too much drag." "Those checkpoints are federal law," I replied evenly, keeping my face perfectly neutral. "Without them, FACA will ground every plane we own." "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "That is such a legacy mindset. We need to streamline. We need to move fast and break things." She actually used that phrase, "move fast and break things." When you are dealing with social media algorithms, breaking things gets you engagement. When you are dealing with industrial-grade ammonium nitrate and lithium battery pallets at 30,000 feet, breaking things gets people killed and sends executives to a maximum security federal penitentiary. But Chloe did not care. She immediately began drafting proposals to dismantle the safety barriers I had spent 8 years building. She authorized the bypassing of secondary inspections to speed up the loading docks. She told the floor managers to ignore the weight limit alerts on the cargo planes. She was cheerfully tearing down the structural integrity of a $3 billion company, completely blind to the federal grenade she was juggling. And I, the invisible architect who had kept the pins safely in place for almost a decade, just watched from the shadows, knowing the blast radius was going to be spectacular. The transformation was swift and deeply offensive. Within 48 hours, the sterile, disciplined environment of the cybersecurity floor was aggressively converted into something resembling a bankrupt Silicon Valley startup. Chloe decided that heavy encryption and biometric security lacked, as she put it, synergy. The sturdy, ergonomic workstations where my team used to monitor global threat vectors were dragged out and replaced by raw-edge wooden tables and ping-pong stations. The constant, hollow echoing sound of plastic ping-pong balls bouncing against concrete floors replaced the quiet hum of intense focus. The crowning jewel of this catastrophic interior redesign was a glaring, hot pink neon sign buzzing directly above the reinforced door of the central server room. It read in cursive font, "Good vibes only." You do not want good vibes near a mainframe housing access codes for highly combustible aerospace shipments. You want paranoia. You want relentless, unyielding paranoia. But paranoia was not aesthetic. The absurdity did not stop at the decor. A complete massacre of competence followed. In a single Tuesday afternoon, Chloe fired 7 of our most senior regulatory lawyers. Their crime? According to the termination memo, they were unwilling to step out of their comfort zones. These were men and women with decades of experience navigating federal commerce law, dismissed because they refused to pretend that shipping weaponized chemicals could be treated like delivering organic dog food. One lawyer, a man who had dedicated 20 years of his life to keeping this company compliant, was escorted out by security simply because he asked how a circle structure would determine legal liability during a chemical spill. To replace the legal team, Chloe brought in a squad of mindset consultants. We paid these charlatans $3,000 an hour to host mandatory seminars on corporate manifestation. I watched, deadpan, as a man wearing a turtleneck and no socks stood in front of the board of directors and drew the new company organizational chart. He proudly declared that the traditional corporate pyramid was a symbol of patriarchal oppression. "Our new structure," he announced, was a circle, a holistic circle of energy. I remember staring at the whiteboard, calculating exactly how long it would take for a circular command structure to accidentally authorize a mid-air collision. Then came the email that shifted the crosshairs directly onto me. It arrived at 2 o'clock on a Thursday from Human Resources. Subject: Synergistic Role Realignment. I opened it to find a cheerful, corporatized paragraph informing me that my position as System Integrity Advisor was being, quote, restructured into a peripheral support role, unquote. In plain English, they were stripping me of all internal approval authority. On the company servers, I was no longer the gatekeeper, I was just an overpaid clerical worker. They wanted to move fast, and my meticulous safety checks were the brakes they desperately wanted to cut. What these visionaries failed to comprehend was that internal company policy does not supersede federal law. They could change my title on a spreadsheet, but they could not magically bypass the titanium token sitting on my desk. I immediately drafted 4 urgent, highly detailed emails addressed to Chloe, the new chief executive officer, and the remaining husk of the legal department. I attached over 200 pages of the Federal Aviation Commerce Authority Regulatory Code. I highlighted the exact penal codes in bright yellow. I explained, using small, easily digestible words, that Token Beta 7 was not company property, it was a high-level government asset issued specifically to my biometric signature. I warned them that the legal transfer of this device could only be executed through a federal security liaison, a grueling bureaucratic process that required an absolute minimum of 90 days of rigorous background vetting. You cannot simply hand over federal clearance like a gym membership card. I hit send, leaning back in my chair, waiting for the panic to set in. I expected an emergency meeting. I expected a frantic phone call from the legal department realizing the sheer magnitude of their oversight. Instead, 30 minutes later, my inbox chimed. It was a reply from Chloe. There was no formal acknowledgement of the federal codes. There was no request for a meeting. Her entire response consisted of a single sentence and a highly inappropriate graphic. Just leave it. The new legal team will use artificial intelligence to handle it. Stop being so negative, Mia. She punctuated this profound display of administrative negligence with a bright yellow smiley face emoji. She was going to fight the federal government with a large language model and good vibes. The sheer scale of her ignorance reached its absolute peak later that same week. Chloe's heavily restructured, artificially intelligent legal team managed to commit an error so fundamental it bordered on sabotage. They forgot to renew the corporate aviation liability insurance. They simply let the policy lapse. For a logistics company handling hazardous materials, operating without liability insurance is an instant death sentence. If the automated systems of the government detected the lapse, they would suspend our operating license by midnight, plunging 5,000 employees into immediate unemployment. I hated what this company had become. I loathed the neon signs and the mindset coaches, but I knew the warehouse workers, the pilots, and the loading dock crews who relied on their paychecks to feed their families. So, despite being officially demoted to a peripheral support role, I locked myself in my office. I bypassed the internal network blocks Chloe had implemented, dug deep into the legacy code of the federal reporting software, and spent 12 agonizing hours patching the system. I manually forged a temporary, legal extension using a 50-year-old loophole in the commerce law, shielding the company from the automated federal sweep. I drank 6 cups of terrible break room coffee, staring at lines of code until my vision blurred. I saved thousands of jobs in complete silence while the vice president of innovation was undoubtedly asleep, dreaming of her perfectly curated holistic circle. 3 weeks before my final scheduled day, the Human Resources Department mandated my presence in a glass-walled conference room. A junior representative, looking deeply uncomfortable in a poorly fitted suit, slid a 40-page non-disclosure agreement across the polished table. It was a laughable, boilerplate document, undoubtedly a template downloaded from a cheap legal website at the behest of their new mindset coaches. Clause 17 explicitly forbade me from taking any, quote, proprietary corporate inventions, unquote, with me upon my departure. I had never invented a single thing for Vanguard. I managed federal risk. I kept airplanes from falling out of the sky. But I did not argue. I picked up a pen and signed my name with a sharp, aggressive slash of blue ink across the dotted line. I wanted out. The final countdown had officially begun. A few days later, I was back in my dimly lit office, slowly packing 8 years of my life into 2 standard brown cardboard boxes. I did not have much to take. There were no framed photographs of family vacations. There were no motivational posters on the walls. My legacy consisted of thick regulatory reference manuals, a chipped ceramic coffee mug, and a few heavy sweaters I kept draped over my chair to combat the freezing temperatures of the server room. The quiet, rhythmic rustle of cardboard and packing tape was abruptly shattered by the shrill, synthetic shriek of the mainframe proximity alarm. It was the primary red alert. A massive shipment containing industrial-grade lithium battery arrays was queued for an emergency export run on Tarmac 4. These were highly unstable power cells. If packed incorrectly, or if the pressure normalization failed at 30,000 feet, they were prone to catastrophic thermal runaway. The automated loading matrix was desperately trying to push the flight manifest through to the cockpit crew, but it was slamming repeatedly into a digital brick wall. The system was screaming in digital agony because it was missing the biometric handshake. It needed token beta 7. The deeply ingrained instinct to protect this company flared up instantly. It was an automatic reflex, forged over thousands of stressful hours in the dark. I abandoned my cardboard boxes and sat down at my workstation. My fingers danced rapidly across the mechanical keyboard, drafting a comprehensive, urgent resignation email. I was not just saying a polite goodbye, I was building them a heavy-duty lifeboat. I attached a meticulously detailed, step-by-step protocol for the emergency federal handover of the biometric token. I included the direct desk phone numbers of the specific regulatory liaisons they needed to contact at the Aviation Authority. I laid out the exact federal forms they needed to file before midnight to prevent an immediate, catastrophic grounding of the entire fleet. All they had to do was read the text and follow the instructions. One click of my mouse, and I would save them from the devastating consequences of their own staggering incompetence one last time. My right index finger hovered exactly half an inch above the send button. The cursor blinked steadily on the bright monitor. Then, a small, cheerful notification bubble popped up in the bottom right corner of my screen. It was a direct ping from the internal company messaging platform. The sender was Chloe. I opened the chat window. The message read, "Mia, since you are free anyway, go down to the lobby and buy me an oat milk matcha latte. Keep the change." Time stopped. The shrill, piercing alarm from the server room faded into a dull, distant hum, like the sound of an ocean trapped inside a seashell. I stared at the bright pixels forming her words. I did not feel a sudden spike of hot, blinding rage. Hot anger is sloppy. It makes you reckless and prone to errors. What washed over me in that quiet room was something entirely different. It was a profound, crystalline silence. The heavy, suffocating resentment that had been slowly crushing my chest for the past 8 years simply evaporated into the cold, conditioned air, the deep stress of the long nights, the unappreciated sacrifices, the sheer, exhausting burden of guarding a fortress for people who actively wanted to tear down the protective walls. It all dissolved into absolute, terrifying clarity. I felt an overwhelming sense of cold purification. I slowly turned my head away from the monitor. I looked at the brushed aluminum lockbox sitting on the edge of my desk. Inside that box rested token beta 7. It was the key to their entire $3 billion universe, sitting quietly in the shadows. They did not want a guardian. They wanted an errand girl. I turned back to the screen. I stared at the carefully constructed email, the lifeboat I had sacrificed my own peace of mind to build. I highlighted the entire block of text. I pressed delete. The screen wiped brilliantly clean. The lifeboat was gone. I reached over, closed the lid of the aluminum box, and secured the latch with a sharp, satisfying click. I typed a 2-word reply to Chloe. "Sure thing." I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the cold, hollow smile of someone who had just stepped off the tracks mere seconds before a high-speed freight train derailed. I made a silent vow right there in the pale glow of the monitor. I was done being the invisible shield. I was done catching the sharp knives they carelessly tossed into the air. I was going to pack my box, walk out the front door, and let gravity do exactly what gravity does best. My final day at Vanguard Aerospace Logistics faded into existence with a hollow, muted quality. There were no emotional farewells, there was no cheap sheet cake resting on a breakroom table, and certainly no gathering of colleagues to wish me well. The entire fourth floor was a ghost town. The staff had been corralled into the main auditorium for a mandatory 4-hour seminar hosted by Chloe titled Corporate Chakra Opening and Synergistic Flow. I paced the empty carpeted hallways one last time. The heavy aluminum lockbox rested deep inside the right pocket of my wool coat. It bumped rhythmically against my hip with every step. I felt the physical weight of token beta 7, a constant reminder of the invisible tether binding me to the federal government. According to the strict, unforgiving mandates of the Federal Aviation Commerce Authority, physical possession meant absolutely nothing without the proper digital offboarding. The chain of custody was strictly biometric, until I stood before a certified federal auditor, inserted the drive into a secure terminal, and allowed a vascular vein reader to verify my conscious, legal surrender of the encryption keys. I was still the primary liable entity. I was still the one responsible if things went wrong. The clock on my phone shifted to exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was time. I walked away from the server farm and headed toward the executive suites. The atmosphere shifted drastically as I approached the glass corner office belonging to the Vice President of Innovation. The air was thick with the scent of expensive hairspray and freshly brewed espresso. A professional public relations crew had entirely taken over the space. Heavy studio lights on tall aluminum stands cast a blinding, artificial daylight across the room. A photographer was circling Chloe, snapping rapid bursts of photos for an upcoming feature in a prominent women in business magazine. She was sitting on the edge of her mahogany desk, posing with a tablet she clearly did not know how to turn on, flashing a brilliantly white, entirely practiced smile. I stepped through the open glass doorway. The soft click of my sensible leather shoes on the hardwood floor was drowned out by the camera shutters. I did not announce myself. I simply walked into the center of the chaotic photo shoot, moving with deliberate, glacial precision. The air in the room seemed to turn solid, the ambient noise fading into a low hum. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers grazed the cold metal of the lockbox. I pulled it out and placed it gently onto the pristine surface of her desk. The dull thud of the heavy aluminum settling against the wood felt like a gunshot in the sterile room. Chloe broke her pose, her perfectly manicured eyebrows furrowed in a display of genuine annoyance. She glanced down at the dull metal casing, then back up at my neutral face. "What is this?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "A parting gift?" I looked directly into her eyes. I kept my voice perfectly flat, stripping away any trace of emotion. "The highest level system approval key," I replied evenly. "You said your team could handle it, so I am handing it over to the authorized person, which is you." Time seemed to stretch, warping into a painfully slow crawl. The photographer paused. The makeup artist lowered her brush. Chloe let out a small, dismissive scoff. She reached her hand forward. I watched, fascinated, as her fingers, adorned with heavy gold rings, closed around the cold titanium shell of the token. The action took only a second, but to me, it unfolded frame by agonizing frame. She did not ask for a manifest. She did not ask for the standard legal release forms. She did not request a federal security liaison to witness the transfer. She just took it. The horrifying reality of that single, careless movement echoed loudly in my mind. The official, legally binding chain of custody was instantly, violently snapped. The very millisecond the skin of her fingers made contact with that restricted government asset without proper biometric certification, she crossed a fatal, irreversible threshold. It was no longer an internal company transfer. In the absolute, unforgiving eyes of federal law. Chloe had just committed a high-level, unauthorized theft of a restricted government access node. She had stolen the keys to a federal fortress. I did not blink. I did not breathe a single word of warning. I simply offered her a polite, practiced corporate smile. I turned on my heel and walked out of the glass office. I kept walking down the long corridor, past the empty cubicles, straight through the revolving glass doors of the main lobby. As I stepped onto the concrete pavement, the bright, blazing sunlight of the late afternoon hit my face. The heavy, suffocating burden that had rested on my shoulders for nearly a decade was completely, wonderfully gone. My mind was entirely empty of worry. I was finally free. 14 days after I walked out the door, Vanguard Aerospace Logistics began to suffocate. The bleeding started slowly, then accelerated into a massive arterial hemorrhage. You cannot simply warehouse hundreds of tons of volatile industrial chemicals and pretend everything is fine. The loading docks were paralyzed, without a verified biometric signature to validate the safety manifests. The automated security gates remained firmly locked. Pressure from massive global clients reached a boiling point. The board of directors was demanding answers. The supply chain was choking to death. In the center of this escalating catastrophe sat Chloe. Instead of recognizing the immense danger, her towering arrogance blinded her to the reality of the situation. She viewed the gridlock not as a federal warning, but as a minor technical glitch left behind by a bitter former employee. She decided to fix it herself. She gathered her newly hired, woefully inexperienced information technology team, a group of recent graduates who thought cybersecurity meant updating their antivirus software. She slammed the heavy titanium casing of my old device onto a central server console. She ordered her team to break into it. They did not use sophisticated decryptors. They used a cheap, off-the-shelf brute force algorithm they likely downloaded from a dark web forum. They wired the token to a diagnostic terminal and ran a script designed to trick the hardware into bypassing the vascular vein reader. It was the digital equivalent of trying to pick a bank vault lock with a rusty paperclip. But hardware is a funny thing. Sometimes, if you hit it hard enough with a hammer, a green light will eventually flicker on. And the green light did flicker on. Chloe smiled. She genuinely believed she had just outsmarted federal encryption with a few lines of sloppy code. She sat down in the leather chair, pulled the keyboard close, and looked at the glowing monitor. Displayed on the screen was a backlog of over 40 massive cargo flights, all grounded, all carrying hazardous, highly reactive materials. With a dramatic flair, she moved the mouse and clicked a single button labeled, Approve All. In an instant, the massive steel doors on the loading docks began to roll upward. The warning sirens ceased. The fleet was suddenly authorized for takeoff, intoxicated by her own perceived brilliance. Chloe immediately pulled out her phone, opened her professional networking application, and drafted a triumphant post. She bragged to her thousands of followers that she had, quote, completely eliminated cumbersome legacy procedures and optimized our global workflow, unquote. She posted a bright photograph of herself with the server racks in the background. 30 miles away, in the quiet, sunlit suburbs, I was wearing gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed straw hat. The air smelled of fresh soil and damp leaves. I was calmly using a pair of sharp steel shears to prune a row of overgrown yellow roses in my backyard. I snipped a dead branch. I took a slow sip of hot chamomile tea resting on a nearby wooden table. It was a beautiful, peaceful morning. My phone, resting next to my teacup, vibrated violently against the wood. I pulled off my right glove and picked up the device. The screen was completely black. Save for a stark red banner cutting across the center, it was a direct, automated ping from the central servers of the Federal Aviation Commerce Authority. The text was short and chilling. Level 1 alert. Approval system anomaly. I smiled. Setting the phone back down, I picked up my shears and turned back to my roses. Here is the beautiful, terrifying secret about Token Beta 7 that Chloe and her mindset consultants never bothered to learn. The token was not just a lock. A lock only keeps people out. The federal government does not just want to keep intruders out of their hazardous material networks. They want to know exactly who is trying to break in. Token Beta 7 was a highly classified honeypot. It was a sophisticated military-grade transceiver. When the device detects a brute-force digital attack, it does not permanently freeze the system. That would only alert the hacker to stop. Instead, it plays dead. It allows the bypass. It turns the light green. It lets the commands pass through to the logistics servers. But the very microsecond that green light illuminates, a silent, encrypted distress beacon is fired directly to the Cyber Command Center at the Department of Defense and the Enforcement Division of the Aviation Authority. The signal carries everything. It transmits the exact geographic coordinates of the terminal. It broadcasts the precise Internet protocol address of the network. Most devastatingly, it forcefully takes command of every single web camera, security feed, and microphone in the immediate vicinity of the breach, streaming a live, high-definition feed of the perpetrator straight to federal agents. Chloe thought she was approving flights. In reality, she was broadcasting a live confession of a federal crime directly to the Pentagon. Back at the airport, the heavy cargo planes, loaded with tons of unstable chemicals, were lumbering down the taxiways. Their massive jet engines roared as they prepared to turn onto the main runway for takeoff. The pilots were running their final pre-flight checks, entirely unaware of the radioactive legal target painted on their fuselages. They never made it to the runway. The horizon suddenly erupted with flashing red and blue strobe lights. A massive convoy of dozens of heavy black, bulletproof government utility vehicles tore through the perimeter gates of the airport security fence. They did not pause for the guard booths. They smashed straight through the barriers, sirens screaming like mechanical banshees. The convoy split into tactical formations, swarming the tarmac with terrifying speed. They surrounded the massive cargo planes, cutting off their paths, violently forcing the entire $3 billion fleet to an immediate, grinding halt. While the planes were violently halted on the tarmac, a secondary, completely synchronized operation was underway at the Vanguard headquarters. The glass doors of the main lobby were shattered by a battering ram. Over 60 armed federal agents wearing heavy tactical vests poured into the building. The synergistic circle of energy was instantly shattered by the deafening shouts of law enforcement securing the perimeter. The entire building was placed under absolute, impenetrable lockdown. Agents stormed the server rooms and physically severed every single network cable from the wall, plunging the corporate network into total darkness. Upstairs, the Vice President of Innovation was utterly oblivious. Chloe was in the middle of a high-profile, live-streamed virtual press conference, boasting to industry leaders about her new streamlined efficiency model. Her thousands of viewers watched in stunned silence as the thick glass doors of her office were violently pushed open. 3 federal agents stepped into the frame, right there, on a live internet broadcast. They pulled her out of her ergonomic leather chair and locked heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. Her aesthetic composure instantly vanished. She thrashed wildly, screaming at the top of her lungs. "It is Mia Rogers' fault. She gave it to me. You need to arrest her." Her high-priced defense lawyers wasted no time. They immediately issued a federal subpoena, dragging me into a preliminary hearing at the district courthouse. Their strategy was painfully transparent. They wanted to paint me as the bitter, disgruntled ex-employee who intentionally planted a trap for a naive executive. They wanted a scapegoat. They thought the invisible architect would crumble under the bright lights of a federal courtroom. They were tragically mistaken. I walked into the courtroom wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. I sat down in the heavy wooden witness chair, my expression completely blank. Chloe's lead attorney stood up, wearing a condescending smirk, ready to verbally tear me apart. Before he could even formulate his first loaded question, I calmly reached into my briefcase and handed a thick, perfectly organized binder to the lead federal prosecutor. I did not come to argue. I came with an avalanche of legally admissible receipts. First, I presented the printed records of the 4 urgent warning emails I had sent to Chloe and the executive board. explicitly citing the federal law that mandated a minimum 90-day security vetting period for the biometric token transfer. Next, I provided the authenticated system logs. These logs irrefutably proved that I had attempted to initiate the official digital surrender protocol, but my access had been prematurely revoked and blocked by the Human Resources Department. Then came the killing blow. On my final day, before my access badge was deactivated, I had legally submitted a data retrieval request to download my personal floor security footage, a standard right under the previous employee handbook. I handed a flash drive to the bailiff. The courtroom lights dimmed. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. Everyone in the room, including the judge, watched the crisp, high-definition, silent video. They saw me walk into Chloe's brightly lit office. They saw me place the heavy titanium lockbox onto her desk. They saw me stand perfectly still, offering no paperwork. And then, they watched in absolute horror as Chloe casually reached out and grabbed the highly restricted federal asset without signing a single document, without requesting a witness, and without authorizing a biometric transfer. The defense attorney's face drained of all color. The chain of custody was broken by her own hand, captured in brilliant 4,000 pixel resolution. The evidence was so overwhelming, so surgically precise, that the federal prosecutors closed their files right then and there. They did not ask me a single follow-up question. I was immediately dismissed from the stand, entirely cleared of any wrongdoing. The legal hammer fell with terrifying force by forcibly bypassing a government biometric lock and authorizing the movement of reactive chemicals under a false digital identity. Chloe had crossed a line that money could not erase. The judge informed her that she was being indicted on 2 massive federal charges: impersonating a federal official and involuntary aviation security terrorism. The fallout was swift and absolute. The Federal Aviation Commerce Authority permanently revoked Vanguard's operating license without the ability to fly. The $3 billion logistics empire hemorrhaged cash and filed for total bankruptcy within exactly 48 hours. The useless chief executive officer lost every single penny of his inherited fortune, his entire legacy wiped out in a single weekend. As for Chloe, the judge deemed her an extreme flight risk. She was denied bail and sent directly to a federal detention center to await a trial that would undoubtedly end in a mandatory, unappealable prison sentence. A week later, the weather was exceptionally clear. I was sitting on the sunlit balcony of a quiet corner cafe, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. I took a slow, deliberate sip of a very strong, very dark Americano. I opened the morning newspaper, a genuine smile spreading across my face as I read the front-page headline detailing the catastrophic, complete collapse of Vanguard Aerospace Logistics. There are certain people in this world who believe that throwing a menial task at a subordinate is a display of ultimate power. They think ordering someone to fetch a cup of coffee is a harmless way to assert their dominance. But what those people completely fail to understand is that sometimes the price of a cup of coffee is an entire empire. Thank you so very much to all of our wonderful listeners for tuning in to today's story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let us know in the comments. As we mentioned, YouTube has unfortunately turned off our ability to earn money from these videos, leaving us without the funds to keep our channel alive. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us out, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness allows us to pay our incredibly hard-working staff so they can feed their families and continue creating these thrilling corporate revenge stories for you. You can easily make a donation by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next story.